Welcome, one and all, to the Beauty Channel, where you're going to learn today how to become ruggedly handsome. Today on Evan Writes, we're going to go ahead and discuss how to identify the first edition of a book. And not only that, but whether or not it is a first printing or a subsequent printing of said book. Now, what brought this topic about? Today I happened upon a bit of luck. I ran into Brandon Sanderson's Mistborn, or rather The Hero of Ages, the third book in the trilogy. I've been looking for the hardcover copies of this book for a very long time, because personally I hate reading paperbacks. I hate how it's very likely that you're going to ruin the edges of the book and everything with a paperback. They're just too flimsy. I don't like it. I like having a hardback, and I'm glad I finally happened upon this because you can't find them in stores anymore. I'm still missing the first two, but this is a step toward the right direction. Moving on, what made me move on to this topic of identifying a first edition or a first printing of a book? Well, when I found this book, I noticed that the pages looked very old, and it made me wonder, is this a first edition? Is this a first printing? What is the difference? What does that mean? And I did a lot of research, and I found out a fast and easy way to tell the difference. And I'm going to go ahead and share that with those of you who are curious. Maybe you are new to collecting and you want to collect first editions and you don't know how. Maybe you want to find first printings. Maybe you just have a lot in your library and you want to see what you have. Well, I'm here to answer those questions for you today on how to do that. The first thing you have to recognize in your book is the title page on the inside. Now, this is kind of interesting. This is the Hero of Ages title page. They're pretty easy to find in books, and if you don't know what a title page is, I don't know why you're reading. Anyway, on the back side is the copyright page. It all usually looks something like that, and it has a lot of nonsense that you might not understand. But there are a couple things that you can get from this. In this particular book, it specifically says right here, you can't really see on my video, but I'm going to point it out to you anyway, it says first edition. That's the easiest way to know if something's a first edition. On the copyright page, it will outright say that. Now, not all books will say this, and that's okay. How do you recognize if it's not a first edition or if it is a first edition if the book doesn't tell you it's a first edition? Stay tuned and I'm going to tell you. Before we move on to that topic, I do want to go ahead and give a disclaimer that sometimes there are things called book club books that are face-to-face reprinting of every single page, and thus can seem and have all the information of a first edition because they copied it directly from that, but they are not first editions. How do you recognize this? Well, in hardcovers it's easy because if you have the dust jacket, there's always going to be a price up there in the front page of your dust jacket. If it is not there, if there is no price, it is a book club printing, and therefore it is not worth almost anything, even if it proclaims itself to be a first edition. Aside from that, I don't know. There's probably some details inside that give it away, but I don't know the ins and outs of that. But this is the easiest way to tell. But now that that's out of the way, let's actually go into the important stuff of how to recognize a first edition and a first printing of your book. So let's see if I can get my camera to focus on this. So right over here, I can't do this. Right there, it says first edition, okay? Sometimes they say it with words, sometimes they say it with numbers. That's kind of cool, okay? That is the easiest way to tell if it's a first edition, if first edition is printed. Now, first edition just means that it is the first time that this book has been printed in said version. So this is the first hardback edition, which it also just happens to be the first edition ever made of the book. Now, how do I know if it's a first printing? Now, this is something that you will find in the majority of books, and you will find a number line somewhere on that copyright page. Like down here, I find my number line. Usually it has numbers. The order doesn't always matter. Sometimes it's descending, sometimes it's ascending order. This particular book starts with 0 and then counts down from 9 to 1. Now, this number line is important. It's not always going to be those same numbers. If the number 1 is present, it means you have a first printing of that particular edition. If the number 1 is missing, it means you have a later edition. By rule of thumb, now this is the trick, the lowest number on that line is the current printing of your book. This one, the lowest number, technically is 0, but because 1 is present, I know it is a first printing of the book. If 1 was missing, if 2 was missing, and 3 was the lowest number, this would have been the third printing, yet it would still be the first edition of the book, just the third printing of the first edition, which isn't as valuable, but because it's the first edition, still makes it worth something. This particular one is a first printing and a first edition, which I thought was cool, which made me want to make this video because I learned how to identify that. Now let's look at a couple of other books. You might not be able to see very well with my camera. I will try to help. Maybe I'll add the numbers onto this video a little later in order so you can see what it says. But I have this particular edition of Elantris. Now this is a recent purchase, so there's no way this is a first printing. But is it a first edition? I don't know. Let's see. I'm going to go behind the title page. Let's see, here's the title page. And behind it, I'm going to go ahead and open it up. Let's see what it says. Yes, this is indeed the copyright page. You will find this usually behind the title page in most books. Now this particular one, let's see what it says. It says the first edition of the book was published in May of 2005. Now that was the version that was made first edition. The first edition of the mass market paperback, which is what this is, was made in 2006, June of 2006. So this is a first edition of the mass market paperback, which means it's not really worth anything because mass market is never worth anything, except for maybe the price you pay for it if you're lucky and it's in good condition. Now underneath it though, we're going to see that number line at the very bottom. Let's see if I can get it to focus a little better. Okay, so that number line, it starts over here with 20 and it descends to the number 13. Now 13 is the lowest number in that line. Now this line isn't always at the bottom of the page, sometimes it's in the middle, but when you find that line, you can figure out what printing it is. Now this particular printing is the 13th printing of the mass market paperback edition, which, as I said before, means it's worth next to nothing, especially since it's a 13th printing. But it's cool that I know what version this is and what printing it is. That's how you find it. Let's look at another book. I am about to read this eventually, The Wise Man's Fear, because I finally finished the first one, The Name of the Wind, the other day. You can go see my review on that if you'd like. But let's go ahead and find the title page of this book and check and see on the page behind it, as you see, what edition this is. Now this one particularly says it's the first mass market printing, as the same thing with Elantris. So it's mass market, so it's not going to be worth anything anyway. But underneath it we see the numbers starting with 15 and ascending this time to 19. That means that this version, because 15 is the lowest number, it means that it's the 15th printing of the mass market paperback edition, or the first mass market paperback edition. What makes it the first printing? It just means that they haven't changed the edition since. So they haven't changed any words to make them need to reprint it. Sometimes there's some blatant errors in a text and they need to reprint it, and that would become a second edition. But because this is the original text, at least the original text as it was the first time it was printed in mass market, it means that this is the first mass market edition, but it's still mass market, so it's not worth anything. Let's go to this next one over here. This is Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. Now I know for a fact that this one is a very new copy because I bought it fairly recently, about a year ago, and that means there's no way that this is the first edition, right? I don't know, let's look. Behind the title page, we're gonna get that copyright page again. We see it right there? Yeah, okay. So I'm gonna go ahead and read, see if I can find what it says. All right, so this says it's the first American edition. So what does that mean? That means that this book is the first American edition of Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. As we all know, the original versions had Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, and that is the UK version. But this is the first American version. Does that mean it's worth something? Still probably not, and let me show you why. Underneath it, we don't get a very long number line this time. The number line is right here. It's 2 numbers. If you can see in the video, I'm just going to tell you regardless. It says 101 and then 100. That means that this is the 100th printing of the first edition, the first American edition rather, of Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. That goes to show you just how popular J.K. Rowling is. If things like Patrick Rothfuss and Brandon Sanderson, I recently purchased these books a week or so ago, and their editions are 13 or less. This one's already over 100. That means that it has a crazy number of prints, and it goes to show something, that it's still the first American edition. Yes, it's a first edition, but it's not worth much because the printing number is so high. So in order to get a book that counts for something, it needs to have both first edition and be a low printing number. Ideally the first or second, maybe the third, depending on how famous that book is. Let's go with this next one. Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince. Now I have 2 copies of this book. I grabbed this one at random, and let's see what this one says. Maybe we will be surprised. Behind the title page, as we see it's the title page, we're going to go ahead and do it again, where we see this. And the numbers this time are on the bottom of the page. It is in descending order from 10 to 1. What does that mean? 1 is present, it is the lowest number. That means this is the first printing of whatever edition it is. Let's see if I can find, and it says first American edition. That means that this book, this particular copy of Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, is not only a first edition or first American edition, but it is also a first printing of that edition, which makes it worth a lot more than, say, a 100th printing like Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone was. I don't know how much more, but it's cool that I have a first edition and first printing of this book, especially since this one happens to be my favorite of the series. We'll move on to one final example, and we will go ahead and call this a video. I hope this has been helpful for some of you who are curious. Maybe you started book collecting and you want to know how to verify if something is a first edition or a first printing. Or maybe you're just curious to see what's in your library already. I know I was, which is why I have all these books out here and decided to make this video. Let's go ahead and see. This is a book called The Lesser Dead by Christopher Buehlman. It is a horror book that was recommended to me by a bookseller when I asked if he had any lesser known authors that I could read and that would be really good reads, and he said this particular author is really good, so I'll give him a try here pretty soon. But let's go check behind the title page, and we will get that same page as before. Now we can clearly see the numbers right here. This is in descending order. Sometimes it's ascending, sometimes descending, sometimes it like switches from one side to the other, but the important thing is what is the lowest number present. As I stated before, this one starts at 10, goes down to 1, so I know that this is a first printing of whatever edition this particular book is. It takes a little bit of extra looking to see if it is a first edition or not, but we know it's a first printing. Over here it says the publishing history. The first hardcover edition was published in October of 2014. This is not a hardcover version, so this is not the first hardcover edition. But we know that there is a trade paperback edition, and this happens to be the first trade paperback edition. Is that worth something? I don't know. It's a lesser known author, so probably not at this point in time, but it is a first edition and first printing of the trade paperback of this particular book, which is worth at least more than the mass market paperback if it ever gets there. From what I understand, it probably goes in order of rarity from hardcover first editions, first printings, to trade paperback first editions, first printings, to mass market first edition, first printings. Of course, there are other authors with other editions for other countries, other languages, reprintings with different covers. There's a lot that goes into book collecting, and it just depends on what kind of collector you are. For example, Brandon Sanderson, with his Mistborn trilogy, came out with leather-bound editions of his books, and those are pretty expensive in and of themselves, but it's a different edition altogether, and in the end they'll still probably end up becoming more expensive than the first printing, first edition in the future, because they're such a limited item. One day maybe I'll get a hold of at least Mistborn of that. We'll see. It would be pretty cool. But anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope it helped you understand a little bit about how to decipher and figure out if your book is a first printing or a first edition, or how that all works out. Hopefully I made this nice and clear for you. If you enjoyed the video, go ahead and like and subscribe, all that nonsense. This pattern pretty much follows with a lot of modern books. You won't find anything outside of this pattern for a while. Sometimes the numbers aren't there and only the words first edition or whatever edition are printed. But that's not as common these days, and anything before the 20th century I can't really speak up to. And if you happen to have some ancient Egyptian papyri, I wouldn't be able to tell you if it's a first edition or not, or a first printing. But, you know, if you really have an ancient scroll, most likely it's still going to be worth something. So don't take my word for it. Just be happy that you have one, and maybe try to read it or something. That would be cool. Anyway, it was nice talking to you guys. You can check out my social media down below. I'm starting to get a little bit more active on Twitter. I'm still pretty new to it, and eventually, as I make more art, I'll start uploading to my Instagram. Right now, I don't have anything up there yet because I made it for the channel pretty recently, but we'll see as things go on. In the next week or two, I'll probably do some art when I'm traveling, so maybe I'll throw some stuff up there. Have a great day, guys, and I will see you on the other side. Is this thing on? Cut.